For 6 days in March 2021, a 400-meter ship sat wedged diagonally across the narrowest navigable stretch of the Suez Canal, and every hour it stayed there, roughly $400 million in global trade stopped moving. You know the photograph, you've seen the meme, but here's what you probably don't know. The financial reckoning from those 6 days has never been properly assembled in one place, and the institutional answer to how do we stop this happening again is essentially that we haven't. To understand what 6 days of blockage actually cost, you first have to understand what the Suez Canal is doing on any normal Tuesday. The canal connects the Red Sea to the Mediterranean across roughly 193 kilometers of Egyptian desert. It was opened in 1869, nationalized by Nasser in 1956, and has been the single most consequential shortcut in the global shipping network ever since. Without it, a container ship traveling from Shanghai to Rotterdam adds roughly 9,000 kilometers to its route, around the Cape of Good Hope, across the South Atlantic, and back up through the Bay of Biscay. In any given year, somewhere between 18 and 20,000 vessels transit the canal. That works out to roughly 50 ships per day. They carry crude oil and liquefied natural gas from the Gulf. They carry electronics, clothing, and furniture from East Asian factories toward European consumers. They carry bulk grain moving in the other direction. According to the Suez Canal Authority's own annual reports, the canal handles approximately 12 to 15% of all global seaborne trade by value. That is the baseline. That is what the Ever Given put on pause. The grounding happened at approximately 7:45 in the morning local time on March 23, 2021. The ship, a 220,000-ton ultra-large container vessel operated by Evergreen Marine, lost steerage in a sandstorm-driven wind gust and drove her bow into the eastern bank. She didn't drift there slowly. She was doing about 13 knots. The bow hit, the stern swung. And then she was simply across the entire canal, touching both banks simultaneously, plugging it as effectively as a cork. She wasn't refloated until March 29th. The figure you'll find most often cited is $9.6 billion per day in delayed trade. That number comes from a Lloyd's List analysis published during the blockage itself, and it has since become the canonical shorthand. But it requires some unpacking, because delayed trade and lost trade are not the same thing. Most of what was stuck on those ships, the electronics, the oil, the clothes, eventually moved. It was delayed, not destroyed. So what's the actual damage? Think of it in layers. The first layer is direct delay costs. Shipping companies pay for fuel whether a vessel is moving or not. They pay crews. They pay port slot fees on the far end that cannot simply be rescheduled without penalty. For a large container vessel burning around 80 to 90 tons of bunker fuel per day at idle, 6 days adds up. Aggregate that across the roughly 400 vessels that were queued and waiting when the canal reopened, and the direct operational loss to carriers runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars. At peak queue, 369 vessels were waiting. That is not a traffic jam. That is a parking lot the size of a small sea. The second layer is cargo spoilage and time-sensitive loss. The Ever Given was mostly carrying consumer goods, which are durable, but the broader queue included refrigerated vessels carrying perishables, livestock ships, and tankers with contractual delivery windows. Some of that cargo was genuinely lost. Some livestock shipments resulted in animal welfare crises that drew separate legal attention. The third layer is the supply chain cascade. This is the hardest to quantify. Just-in-time manufacturing depends on predictable arrival windows. When a container doesn't arrive, a factory line may slow, a retail shelf may empty. The German Association of Chambers of Commerce and Industry estimated German trade alone was losing around $350 million per day. Extrapolate globally, and the 9.6 billion figure starts to look, if anything, conservative. 6 days, 96 kilometers of canal. A number that, when you add it up properly, exceeds the annual GDP of several small nations. While 400 ships waited at anchor, a different decision was playing out in maritime operations centers from Hamburg to Singapore. Do we wait, or do we go around? The answer depended on what you were carrying and how much fuel cost you. For a very large crude carrier loaded with Gulf oil, waiting was often the rational choice. Tankers have large cargo volumes relative to their operating costs, and the Cape route adds roughly 12 to 14 days to a voyage from the Gulf to Europe. At $40,000 to $50,000 per day in operating costs, 12 extra days costs you somewhere around $500,000 to $600,000 per vessel. If the blockage looked like it might clear in under a week, and for the first few days it genuinely was not clear when it would clear, waiting at anchor was cheaper. For container ships, the calculus was different. Container operators pay slot penalties at destination ports, and their entire business model runs on schedule reliability. Several major carriers, including Hapag-Lloyd and Maersk, made the call to divert within the first 48 to 72 hours. Their vessels rounded the Cape, arriving 10 to 14 days late at European ports, arriving into a different queue, a different port window, a different world. Marine traffic AIS data recorded the diversion clearly. In the week following the grounding, southbound traffic through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait dropped sharply as incoming vessels from Asia hedged. Cape of Good Hope transit volume spiked measurably. The rerouting had its own cost. Extra fuel burned on Cape diversions across all affected vessels runs into tens of millions of dollars. Carbon emissions from those extra steaming days are not trivial, and the secondary port congestion at Rotterdam, Felixstowe, and Hamburg, when 2 weeks of backed-up cargo arrived nearly simultaneously, was a disruption in its own right. If you've been waiting for the moment this becomes about something larger than one ship, it's now. The Ever Given didn't just block a canal. It ran a live stress test on the redundancy of global trade infrastructure, and the infrastructure failed the test. The ship was refloated on March 29th. You'd think that would be the end of the story. Maritime law had other ideas. The Suez Canal Authority immediately impounded the Ever Given at Great Bitter Lake, the mid-canal staging area, and filed a compensation claim against her Japanese owner, Shui Kisen Kaisha, and her Taiwanese operator, Evergreen Marine. The initial claim was $916 million. The SCA itemized it as covering salvage costs, lost canal transit fees during the blockage, reputational damage to the canal, and what they described as moral damages. A category of claim that maritime lawyers found, to put it gently, interesting. $916 million for a 6-day blockage. The ship's insurers, led by the UK P&I Club, one of the largest protection and indemnity insurers in the shipping world, contested the figure aggressively. UK P&I publicly described the SCA's claim as extraordinarily large, which in British maritime understatement terms is fairly close to calling it absurd. The club argued that legitimate salvage costs plus lost fees were a fraction of the claimed amount, and that moral damages had no established precedent in maritime law at this scale. The negotiation ran for roughly 3 months. The ship sat in Great Bitter Lake throughout. Her cargo, belonging to hundreds of different shippers across dozens of countries, was locked in legal limbo aboard a vessel that couldn't move. The settlement was reached in late July 2021. The precise terms have not been publicly disclosed. Both parties announced they were satisfied. The UK P&I Club issued a statement confirming the matter was resolved and the vessel was free to proceed. What we can infer from publicly available reports is that the final settlement was substantially below the initial $916 million demand, likely in the range of $200 to $500 million, though the sealed settlement means no one outside the parties knows exactly. That gap between $916 million and the actual settlement is itself a number worth sitting with. It suggests the SCA's opening position included significant speculative or punitive elements. It also suggests that the institutional incentives for the Canal Authority are not purely about safety and efficiency. This channel exists because maritime systems contain exactly this kind of buried complexity. The part where a meme photo has a 3-month legal sequel involving $100 million claims and sealed settlements. Subscribe if you want to keep pulling on these threads. The official accident investigation, conducted by the SCA and referenced in subsequent safety analyses, attributed the grounding to a combination of high winds, reduced visibility from a sandstorm, and a possible mechanical or steering issue aboard the vessel. The Ever Given's owners and operators have disputed elements of this finding. What is not disputed? The Ever Given is one of the largest container ships afloat. Her beam is 59 meters. The navigable channel at the point of grounding is roughly 313 meters wide. In absolute geometric terms, there was room. In practical navigation terms, in a 50 km/h crosswind with visibility degraded by sand, in a channel with no meaningful weather abort protocol, room on a diagram is not the same as safety margin in reality. Here is the structural problem. The Suez Canal is, at its core, a 19th century piece of infrastructure operating in the 21st century shipping environment. It was widened and deepened in 2015 with the addition of a second channel along a northern section. But the southern stretch, where the Ever Given grounded, remains a single-lane channel, one ship at a time, no passing lane. The canal does have a vessel traffic system. It does have compulsory pilots. Every vessel transiting the Suez must take an Egyptian SCA pilot aboard. The Ever Given had 2 pilots on the bridge when she grounded. But what the Suez Canal lacks, and what has been absent from the SCA's capital investment priorities for years, is the kind of real-time predictive traffic management system now standard at high-density ports. Systems that model how a vessel of a specific tonnage and beam will handle in current wind and tide conditions. Systems that flag a risk threshold and say, this ship today, in these conditions, at this point in the channel, has a grounding probability above our acceptable limit. Hold it, wait. Rotterdam's Port Authority has been running adaptive vessel traffic services of this sophistication since the early 2000s. Singapore's Maritime Port Authority operates a real-time environmental modeling system that integrates weather, tide, and vessel dynamics. The IMO's guidelines on vessel traffic services have existed since the 1990s. None of this is experimental technology. There is a pattern here that recurs across chokepoint infrastructure globally. When a system works most of the time, the institutional incentive to invest in preventing the rare failure is weak. The Suez Canal generated $6.3 billion in revenue for Egypt in 2022 alone, its best year on record, partly driven by post-COVID trade demand. Against that revenue, the capital cost of a world-class predictive traffic management system is modest, but that system would have no ribbon-cutting moment. It would, ideally, produce nothing visible at all, just ships that don't run aground. The SCA has announced intentions to continue expanding canal capacity. There is, as of the most recent publicly available reporting, no announced program to install a canal-wide predictive grounding risk system of the kind that would have changed the calculus on the morning of March 23, 2021. That is not a failure of technology. It is a failure of institutional priority. Here is the non-obvious implication of the Ever Given story, and it is not about one ship or one company or one canal. The global container shipping network is built on an assumption of chokepoint reliability that has never been formally stress-tested and is not backed by the infrastructure investment that assumption would require. The Suez Canal, the Strait of Malacca, the Bab el-Mandeb, the Panama Canal. These are the load-bearing joints of the global economy. They are not redundant. You cannot reroute the world's trade at scale on a weeks-long basis without serious economic damage. We know this now, empirically, because we watched it happen with one ship in 6 days. The Ever Given grounding cost the global economy somewhere in the range of $50 to $60 billion in delayed trade value when you compound the cascade effects. Figures cited in analyses by Allianz Global Corporate and Specialty in their 2021 Shipping Risk Report. The investment required to materially reduce the probability of a repeat event at Suez is a fraction of that. What that gap tells you is that the people responsible for maintaining chokepoint infrastructure are not bearing the cost of chokepoint failures. The SCA collects transit fees whether the canal is well managed or not. The carriers bear the delay costs. The shippers bear the supply chain costs. The livestock aboard waiting vessels bear costs of a different kind entirely. The SCA's incentive is to maximize throughput, not to minimize tail risk. Until that incentive structure changes, through regulatory pressure, through IMO requirements, through political will in Egypt's government, through insurance pricing that penalizes inadequate infrastructure rather than just inadequate ships, the canal will keep operating as it has. Mostly fine, until it isn't. The question is not whether a vessel of the Ever Given class will ground in the Suez again. The question is whether the second photograph will go as viral as the first, or whether by then we'll have simply accepted that this is how the system works. The Ever Given is, at this moment, still in service. She transits the Suez regularly. If that makes you feel a specific kind of uneasy, you're reading the system correctly. If this got you, the next episode on this channel is about the Flag of Convenience system, why the world's largest shipping fleets are legally registered in landlocked countries with no coastline.